Hi, my name is Selena Rodriguez, and this is for SPED 514. I'm going to be going over some of the information that I have on my infographic organizer. First things first is I feel like special education teachers definitely need to possess a quality of assessment. So being able to assess a student individually and then being able to assess your classroom as a whole. I feel like once you've mastered that, you'll be a lot better to start teaching, because at that point, once you've assessed, you should have a better foundation on what each student is able to complete, and also as a classroom what they'll be able to accomplish. Another thing is, being in special education, your ethics standards definitely have to be yay high. Even as a general education teacher, there's already so many laws in place for students, but mix in special education, you kind of have to take it up a notch, just because there have, different disabilities, so there's different laws in place to protect those students. So I think, pulling from the MCEE, holding oneself accountable, but not just yourself, holding your peer educators also accountable as well. And another thing in the graphic organizer that you'll find is being able to collaborate with your students' families. So not able to just collaborate with that individual student, but also being able to collaborate with their families. I think as an educator, you'll have to understand you're only with that student for X amount of hours, for X amount of days. Families have been with their child, their whole life up until they met you. And so they know better than anybody else, what they're able to do, what they're able to understand, and kind of tips and tricks of what gets them going, what gets them, like, is it a sticker book that's going to help them progress? Is it a chart that, okay, you're going to work X amount of days this hard and you're going to get to pull something out of the prize box? So family members are definitely going to have the inside scoop on that. So being able to collaborate with the families is really big. Also, another thing is being able to speak up, not only for your student, but for your students' families, because sometimes students might not share the same culture as you, might not share the same culture as the community that they're in. So being able to be their voice for the student and their families, especially in situations when families need to reach out to administrators or reach out to the district, but they're, a little timid to do so. So being able to kind of be their voice for them, even if you're just starting the conversation for them, that'll definitely go a long way in that being able to advocate for those families and for that student. Some specific dispositions that has stood out to me out of several ones that were listed are some that I feel like I already practice today. So one being reflection, two being compassion, and the other one curiosity. I feel like being able to reflect at the end of the day and kind of assessing yourself, saying, okay, what could I have done differently with that student? How could I approach that situation a little bit differently? And how could I better on that tomorrow? So being able to, be really reflective with yourself. And I feel like once you've mastered that, you're kind of able to share those practices with your peer educators or even with your students. Sometimes they come in and they're having a rough day or they're having a rough go at it at school. So sharing your reflective practices with them might even help them. Secondly is compassion. I feel like I'm a pretty compassionate person in general, but once I've entered the education system not that long ago, probably a little less than half a year ago, I feel like I definitely upped my compassion standard. I feel like we have to, as educators, we have to understand that our students come from different backgrounds. So they're not always going to come, with a smile on their face. So being able to understand that, sympathize with that, and definitely have compassion for them is going to kind of make you stand out as an educator on campus. You're kind of going to be that go-to person for them. And then last but not least is stay curious. Stay curious as an educator, because if you just kind of like stick to the black and white, I feel like that's not gonna help your students. Staying curious, learning more about the special education field, because again the laws are always changing. And stay curious with yourself, like, what more can I do, what other activity is gonna work. Be curious about your students lives outside of school. Clearly, keep boundaries, but be ask how their weekend was and kind of get to know them a little bit better on that. So curiosity is really big. Some ethical frameworks that stood out to me were having the highest possible learning outcomes, inclusive participation, and again, developing relationships with families. So, to kind of get a little bit deeper into the highest possible learning outcomes, I think that goes back to, assessing the student right at the get-go, right at the beginning, whether that's reading up on their 504, reading up on their IAP, or any other, written legal documents, kind of reading up on that, but then also the assessing the individual in person and really kind of getting a grasp on what helps them grow will definitely, higher the standard of their learning outcome. And then again, inclusive participation. I think you see that a lot in the secondary level. So like junior high and high school, I think you're going to see that a lot, especially if a student does have an IEP or a 504 and they're pushed into general ed classes, like rather it being, a basic math class or an English class, they're going to be with the general population. And so with that, you want to make sure and communicate with the other teachers, making sure, little Sally is also being included in those programs, or in that group work, or just not being left out just because they have special needs. They shouldn't be, left out of the group project, and collaborating with the teacher and figuring out what works best for them. And then, again, going back to developing relationships with the families. I think once you've have built trust with the student, I think they're really going to go back home and say, Miss Rodriguez definitely understands, she gets it. And that's really going to make parents like, okay, I feel better about sending them to school. I feel like they're safe. So again, developing a relationship not only with your student, but with their families. And then some professional practices would definitely be, again, teaching and assessing and making sure the learning that's happening in the classroom is definitely, stimulated. You don't want to just be like, okay, take out your iPads and we're going to do Prodigy, or we're going to do iReady. No, you definitely want to do something. Again, yes, you want to keep the routine, but you want to make sure that the learning is definitely stimulated enough for them. And then another thing is professional development, just keeping up to date, not only yourself, but kind of keeping parents up to date on, the procedures and policies and relevant laws, and then putting them into practice on a daily basis so you're not forgetting that. And then another thing that I feel like is big for me, because that's the position that I'm currently in, and I think is once you've become an educator and once you're a teacher and you get a para-educator or a some schools call it an aide. Once you get one of those in your classroom, you definitely want to make sure they're well equipped with all the trainings that they need, that they understand each and individual student that's in your classroom and what their needs are, and just kind of making sure that you and your paraeducator or aide are on the same page. And I feel like once you've built that relationship and making sure they have the education and the training that they need, that classroom is just going to be run so smoothly. One thing that stood out the most to me from that One Foundation document regarding, our Christian views, and I'm going to go ahead and quote it because I really enjoyed it, and it was salt and light is live out our lives in ways that contribute to the common good. And I feel like long as you keep the common good as your core or one of your core values, I feel like everything else is just kind of going to go smoothly, because you can, you're teaching and or something happens out during lunchtime, you always want to make sure, okay, what's the common good for everybody, not just the student with special needs, all students, what's the common good? And such as the things that we believe at GCU, and what I believe are cultivating and creating and compassion and justice. Those beliefs will definitely, like, if you do those every day, making sure each student has justice, whether that's through academically, or even out during recess, or during break time, during lunch, long as making sure each of your students have they're being treated with respect, they're being treated with compassion. That's definitely going to rub off on everybody else, and they're kind of gain some similar characteristics as well. And then cultivating and creating, that's something you want to instill, like, not only you as a good Christian, but also cultivating and creating with your students, and being able to create a good education foundation with them. And last but not least, is definitely continuing even after school, once I've received my degree, once I've gained my credential, and even after student teaching. I think special education, and again, education in general, that's not something like, okay, I've got my degree, it's a one-stop shop, I'm done. No, being in education, that's because you love to learn, and you're wanting to continue to learn all the time, because again, not only laws are changing, the children's changing, times are changing, technology changes a lot of things. From when I was in school to being in a school now, things are so different. Kids got iPads and they're learning off the iPad. So just constantly learning, going to trainings, either that's going through your district or going to the county, county of education, and going through there, finding out, what's new, what's happening now, especially even as new presidents roll in, education system changes in the United States. So I want to make sure that I'm up to date on all the new policies and procedures. So I feel like one way I'm going to be doing that is, checking with admin and seeing if there's any other trainings that I can go to. If not there, then I'm going to go again a step further, go to the district and speak with the superintendent, or collaborate with other special education teachers, not only special education teachers that are in my school, but go to the neighboring school, go to the elementary school, kind of seeing what they're doing, or observe an elementary teacher if you're a secondary special ed teacher, going to the elementary, observing that one day, because eventually those students in that class will be in that secondary level. So you want to see what they're doing, how they're doing it, and kind of getting a grasp on all of that. So I feel like being in education and then special education, the learning will never stop. You'll kind of have to keep going, reviewing articles. I've really enjoyed reading the textbook for our class, Exceptional Lives. It's really shined a light on different things that have happened that I had no idea about. I mean, to me, special education has always been around, but that hasn't always been the case in the United States. It's pretty recent after reading that book. I mean, it's not all that old. So I think, just constantly taking a deep dive and using those reflective practices, using those collaboration practices, using, advocacy practices, is really just going to keep you on your toes, school year after school year, and just keep growing and keep learning, because again, the students are coming in and they're getting new technology, and they're coming in with more knowledge than you might already know. So just kind of staying on top of your game is always going to be beneficial to you, to your students, to your families, to your community, and to your district.